What I learned on the res. And obviously that's the first thing I learned, that it is the res. It's not the reservation, it's the res. One of my favorite t-shirts that I found at a Goodwill store, Res Life. So yeah, when we talk about the res, that's what we're talking about. So yeah, it's the first thing you need to know. That's what I learned on the res, that it is a res. A few other things that I learned that I'd like to share with you this morning. First one is pronunciation. I told you the name of the town I was going to, and I told you, yeah, we just call it K-Town because nobody knows how to pronounce it. Well, as I learned, the names of these towns are pretty much just the way they look. So let's all say Kai Kotzmovie. Makes sense, right? Kai Kotzmovie. Yeah, I mean, that may not be exactly the way the Hopi pronounce it, but if you say Kai Kotzmovie, they'll know what you're talking about. And it wasn't just this town, it was most of the towns there. For instance, this town, Orabi. Interesting couple facts about Orabi. Orabi is the oldest continuously inhabited town in North America. There's been people living in that place longer than what there's been people living in any other place. Orabi is also where some Mennonite missionaries went back in the 1800s. They started a church there. There was an Orabi Mennonite church at one time. And then the church burned down a couple times. And the Hopi decided that, you know what, these Christians are causing a lot of trouble. We want them to leave town. So they actually kicked the Christians out of Orabi, which is on the top of Third Mesa. The Christians went down to the bottom of the mesa, started a new town, and called it Kai Kotzmovie. Anybody want to try? Bacabee. It's close, but yeah, this is where we ended up going to church the last month, just another town that was close by. And then there's this one, which is where I went to pick up the most of the kids for our school every Sunday, every day. Shungopavi, which is exactly what you thought it'd be, right? And it was interesting, yeah, these names, they looked, you could pronounce them pretty much how they looked. We would go to church and everything was in English except all these churches every week would sing a couple songs in Hopi. And these are old familiar hymns that had been translated back in the early 1900s. And they're old familiar hymns. We knew the tunes. We could start singing them and we knew what song it was. And you look at the words, you could actually kind of figure out what words they were, and you could almost sing along with them, which was really funny when it was just Sue and I and a couple other white people singing a Hopi song. Didn't make much sense at all. But yeah, you know, most of these words, they pretty much made sense. You could look at them and figure out, but not all of them. There were some of them that we had no idea how to pronounce them. Take, for instance, this one. Anybody want to take a shot at that one? It's the Kai Kotzmovie Village Store. Yeah, I never heard it pronounced. I have no idea how to pronounce it or anything like that. Then every once in a while, you'd run across another word that you thought you knew what it was, and then you looked at it again and you say, no, wait a minute, that's not quite right. They got the right number of N's in here. They're just not exactly at the right place. And the really interesting part about that was on the other side of the sign, they had Mennonite spelled right. Just, yeah, you got to take a picture of that sign. A few other things that I learned. One of them is, and I already knew this, but it was good to be reminded of this, that our God is an amazing God. If you ever got a chance to go to northern Arizona, or any place in Arizona, take it. There is some incredible scenery out there. Granted, we had to drive a couple hours to get to any of it, but it was worth the trip. And I don't care whether you went to the Grand Canyon. You look at that and you say, yeah, God's amazing. Or if you went to Canyon de Chelly and looked at this monument, this huge rock. Or if you ended up in Monument Valley looking at some of these structures. Or even if you were in the Painted Desert and you looked at all of these different layers in these hills, it just kind of made you wonder or made you realize God did some incredible things. But if you were to ask Sue and I, the most memorable scenery, the most memorable landscape that we saw, it would have had to have been this. This was our sunrise service. This is what we were looking at when we saw the sun come up on Easter morning. And if you've ever been to Palestine, you will be amazed at how much this looks exactly like Palestine. There was a lot of places that we saw as kind of like, wow, that's exactly what we saw in Palestine. So yeah, it was one of our most memorable Easter sunrise services ever, looking at the sun come up over these rocks, over this canyon. Our God is amazing. But one of the most amazing things I saw from God, one day I was driving down the road, and I saw something, and I said, wait a minute, that can't be. But it turns out it actually was. There's grass, green grass growing in the cracks in the road. This is in the desert where they get less than 10 inches of rain per year. And they get half of that in about a half an hour. So that doesn't leave much for the rest of the year. But there's grass growing in the road. And if you look up here, if I can get my laser to work, there's no green grass growing up there for 100 yards on either side of the road. But there was grass growing in the road. And I got to thinking about that. The God who created all of this stuff from the Grand Canyon to the Painted Desert to everything else also created a seed that would grow in a crack in the road. And the same God who did that is the God who takes care of me, who provides for me. How amazing is our God? To be that worried about little details and to be that involved in my life. Our God is amazing. Another thing I learned was the value of treasures. We've all got treasures, right? We all remember what Jesus said about treasures. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. And we know the rest of that verse, where thieves break in and steal, and moth and rust do corrupt. Had Jesus been on the res, and he'd been talking to people there, he would have said, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, because someday they're going to end up in the dumpster. This is what the dumpster looked like every week, at least. Sometimes it was more. There was one week the guy actually threw some of it off before he dumped it. But if you notice over here, we got a roll of carpet. Back here we got a chair. Here we got a piece of vinyl siding. Over here we got a box of stuff. Back here we got a trailer full of bags. Over by the shop there was another trailer that was a whole lot bigger than that one. It was all full of bags of trash. We got a dog over here who did her part to the litter. She had 14 puppies one day. And that pile of trash next to the dumpster went on for about 30 or 40 yards. And I decided part of my job, part of the reason I was there to get rid of this trash. So every week I filled up the dumpster like this. And eventually the trash man came to us and said, I can take care of this trash for you. I'll haul it away for you. All you got to do is give me some of this gravel back here. And he did. He would come 2-3 times a week. He would load up everything he possibly could while he was on company time, using his company truck to haul gravel away for his driveway. We didn't question the ethics about that. We let him take care of this trash. When I left, all that trash was gone, along with a lot of other trash. One week we hauled away 3 old vans that were broken down, hauled them to a salvage yard, got over $1,000 for them. Scrap metal is pretty valuable out there. And We filled these vans up before we hauled them away with scrap metal. You know, yeah, all of this stuff in this dumpster, all of this trash, everything that was around there, at one point in time was somebody's treasure. And where are our treasures going to end up? In the dumpster someday. On a totally unrelated note, I'm now the owner of a school bus stop sign. There was 3 school buses out there, only one of them worked. And somebody had taken the stop signs off of the other 2 and left them lay on the ground. So while I was cleaning up trash, I cleaned up the school bus stop sign too. It's now hanging on my shop wall. And someday it'll be in the dumpster too. One day my wife came home from school and she said to me, Kendra and I, her other teacher, have come up with a new slogan for a t-shirt. A little bit is better than none. And I thought about it and I thought, you know, that makes a whole lot of sense. That kind of reminds me of what Paul says in 1 Corinthians. I planted the seed, Apollos watered, God has been making it grow. You know, let's face it, these Hopi people are very underprivileged, very impoverished. Most of them live in houses that don't have electricity or running water. And the 4 months we were there, we did not exactly solve all of their problems. But you know what? There's a 7-year-old kid that knows how to read now. There's junior high kids that know how to add without counting on their fingers. And a lot of times when we do service work of any kind, at the end of our time there, we say, yeah, wow, I wish I could stay here longer and I could do more. What we need to say is, you know what? We did our part. We did what we could while we were there. We helped them out some. Their life is better now than what it was. We planted a seed. A little bit is better than none. Another thing I learned when I was out on the res was how to treat people. Specifically, what Paul writes in Philippians 2. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, values others above yourself. We've all heard this verse before, but it's kind of like, yeah, the Hopi taught me what this means. Another one of my favorite t-shirts. Don't worry, be Hopi. Saw that often. What does that mean? And you know, when we got to interact with these people and we realized how they treated others and how they valued others and how they were more concerned about relationships and getting somewhere on time. Yeah, don't worry, be Hopi. And another t-shirt I bought at the same place simply said this on the back of it. Be nice to everyone. And that's what the Hopi were concerned about. We often laughed about being on Hopi time, which meant you showed up whenever you wanted to. But a lot of times they were late because they stopped and helped somebody on the way. If your car broke down, you didn't have to worry about it. Somebody would soon stop and help whatever they could. So how do you be nice to everyone? How do you be Hopi? Well, a couple examples. First one is, what do you want to do when you want to build a house on the res? It's interesting because the res is owned by the United States government. The only privately owned property on the res was the Peace Academic Center, the school we were at, because some president had deeded that to the Mennonite Church years ago. So when you want to build a house, what do? How do you figure out where you can build it? Well, what you do is you go to the local lumber yard, which happened to be 100 miles away, and get a load of concrete blocks. Because everybody built these houses out of concrete blocks. Not all of them, but a good portion of them. So you get 3, 4, 5 pallets of concrete blocks and you can have them delivered to where you wanted to build your house. And then they would sit there for 3 to 5 years. And during that time, if anybody else wanted to build a house there, they could go talk to the elders of the tribe. And the elders would have to decide then whose land this actually was, who had claim to this land because their ancestors had lived there years ago, or whatever else. So yeah, sit there and wait for 5 years looking at this pallet of concrete blocks. And then after 5 years, if nobody had a problem with it, then you could start building. We saw a lot of houses like this. They would put up the walls and they'd stop for another 3 to 5 years for the same reason. If anybody else thought they wanted to build there, they could go talk to the elders during that time. So after 6 to 10 years, you could finish your house and hope that nobody had a problem with it after that. Put the interests of others before your own. Another way I saw of people being nice was the last day we were there, we had a fun day at school, a field day. We went outside and we played games, and we had invited all the parents and friends, and there was probably 80 people there from these 20 or 25 kids. And we had a picnic lunch afterwards, and one of the games we played, which I was in charge of, was a tug of war. And we did this by age groups. These were the youngest kids, and you can see, yeah, they're having a great time out there, pulling as hard as they can on this thing. And this team actually won because they had 5 kids, and the other team only had 4 kids. At least that's why they said they won. And then we did the middle group, and then we did the older group, the junior high age kids. Another part of my responsibilities out there was to be in charge of the PE time, which was pretty much, okay, here's a basketball, let's go play basketball. And they always wanted to play boys against the girls. So we did. So here we are at the tug of war with these older kids, and I told the whole crowd this, and I said, you know what? We're going to do boys against the girls here in this tug of war, because that's what they always like to do. There's a problem here because we got 3 boys and we only got 2 girls, and this one girl weighs about 50 pounds. I said, if any of you adults want to help out these 2 girls, feel free to do that. Before we started, this is pretty much what the girls' team looked like. And somewhere in that line is the 2 girls. I'm not even sure where they are. And of course, when you got this many people on one line, you only got 3 junior high boys on the other side, it soon became evident that these girls were going to win this tug of war. And it was about that point where a couple of the men decided, you know, maybe we ought to go help out these guys. So they did. And I got to tell you, this dude in the front, I think he had muscles dripping off of his earlobes. And I think he could have won this all by himself. And yeah, when he joined the boys' team, the boys instantly started winning. And then some more people joined the girls' team. And eventually, after about 5 minutes, the girls won. But yeah, be nice to everyone. You see somebody in need, go help them out. Whether it's a tug of war or whatever it is. Another learning that came from that is, what happens when you're nice to everyone? What happens when you help out those in need? What happens when you do what Jesus told you to do? Give a cup of cold water in his name to one of these people. Well, let me tell you a story about this one guy. We'll call him Joe. Wasn't his real name, but Joe was one of the junior high students. One of the oldest boys, one of the biggest boys, one of the most obnoxious boys, one of the least cooperative boys, one of the most argumentative boys. And for those of you that have been in Sue's Sunday school class, you know who I'm talking about. You know, he was a trip. Yeah, you tell him to do something and he'd just say, no, I'm not going to do that. So one day, I'm driving the bus, taking these kids home. And the bus route, I went one way, dropped off a couple kids, then turned around and went back the other way, dropped off the rest of the kids. I dropped off these first couple kids, was coming back, and I hear this girl behind me say, oh, look, there's Joe's hat laying in the middle of the road. Joe was having a great day on the bus that day. And Joe loved to stick his head out the window and yell at everybody along the way. And evidently his hat blew off and was laying in the middle of the road. I didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. I just kept driving. He never did say anything to me. I took them all home, dropped them off, took the bus back, got in my car, went back and picked up this hat. So now I've got Joe's hat, and Joe doesn't know that I've got his hat. It just so happened that this happened on March 31st. So the next day at school, I go to chapel and I say, okay, we're going to start a new program here. We're going to have a Student of the Month Club. And this is going to be totally up to you students. You get to nominate whoever you think was a really good student the last month, who was here the most, who was the most cooperative, who learned the most, who did the best job in their homework, whatever else. So, okay, everybody nominate somebody for Student of the Month. Well, what they didn't know was I already knew who was going to win. But during chapel, I make a big deal out of going back and counting these votes. And after chapel, I come back up there and I announce, hey, Belinda is now the Student of the Month for the last month. She got more votes than anybody else. And the amazing thing is, she actually did. And she was also the student who said, hey, look, there's Joe's hat in the middle of the road. And I said, hey, I got this lovely present for you. I had it all wrapped up in a nice bag and everything. And I picked this up just for you, just for this Student of the Month thing. I said, before I give it to you, I got to ask, does anybody know what day this is? It's April Fool's Day. Okay, do any of you think I might be the type of guy that had set all this up just to pull an April Fool's joke? Yeah. Are you a little afraid to look in this bag now? Yeah. Okay, this is an April Fool's joke. I set all this up, but the joke's not on you. The joke's on somebody else. And I just needed your help. I needed someone to come up here and play along with me, even though they didn't know what was going on, and do what they needed to do with this. So go ahead, Belinda, look in this bag and see what sort of present I picked up just for you. She looks in the bag and says, oh, it's Joe's hat. Takes it out and throws it at him. Joe never said a word, never thanked me for it or anything. A couple of weeks later, happened to be Good Friday. We had an Easter egg hunt. You ever try to hide Easter eggs in the desert? If you look real close, there's an Easter egg. And all these kids are running around. We gave them all a brown paper bag, and we're told, go find all the Easter eggs you can, and there was about 300 of them out there, so everybody was happy. See these two guys over here? Not looking for Easter eggs? One of them is Joe. He was way too cool to do anything as childish as go pick up Easter eggs. We got all done. The kids are there looking at their Easter eggs or whatever else, and Joe says to me, hey, I didn't go pick up any Easter eggs. What do you want me to do with my bag? I looked at him, and I looked, and there's, laying on the ground, there's a few empty eggs. Some of the kids had already started opening them, taking the candy out of them, throwing the eggshells on the ground, the plastic eggs. I said, why don't you pick up those plastic eggshells, put them in your bag, and throw it in the trash? Joe did. He didn't argue with me at all. He just went and did it, exactly what I asked him to. Would he have done that a few weeks ago had I not picked up his hat? And this wasn't the only instant. We noticed a huge difference in his attitude because I went and picked up his hat and gave it back to him. A cup of cold water given in the name of Jesus had a tremendous impact on this tough, obnoxious teenage boy. One final thing that I learned, and there's actually two parts to this. In Matthew 6, Jesus is having a conversation with his disciples. And Jesus asks his disciples, who do the people say that I am? And they give him all sorts of answers. And then Jesus says, but who do you say I am? And that's when Peter says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And when Peter says that, that's when Jesus says, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Now, a lot of times we look at that and we think that obviously Peter's the rock. But it's interesting that Jesus uses a different word for this rock as when he calls Peter the rock. So was Jesus saying he was going to build his church on Peter? Or was he saying he's going to build his church on this confession of you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God? I tend to believe it's the latter. And part of the reason I believe that is because the great thing, as Kaylee already said this morning, is when you're off doing volunteer work, you run into some amazing, incredible Christian people. People who have heard the voice of God, who are serving God, who are willing to do what God has gifted them to do, even though they may not think God has gifted them to do that. Let me share a couple examples of people like that. And when I meet these people, I know that God's church is going to survive because of these people that are in it. They might look different. It might not appear to be the same. But because of these people that I meet, God's church is going to be okay. The first one is Kendra. Kendra may not look like it, but Kendra is a Kansas farm girl. Grew up milking cows, raising beef cows. Her dad does some grain farming. Kendra actually owns some beef cows now herself. When she was 13 years old, her dad said, oh, go run the combine. So she did. She's been running the combine ever since she was 13. When she graduated from high school, she went to the local community college and got a degree in agriculture. I'd always planned on taking over her dad's farm someday. Had one sister, no brothers. Hey, she can do this. Somewhere along the way, Kendra learned the joy of serving others. Kendra spent a year in Puerto Rico with the same program we were with, doing service there. She got done with that and she decided, hey, I want to go out to Arizona to Kykosmovie. This school out there, Peace Academic Center, is looking for a cook. She went out there to be the cook at this school. It wasn't long until they told Kendra, no, you're not a cook, you're a teacher. And she said, yeah, I got a 2-year degree in agriculture. I don't know how to teach. I said, that's okay, you'll do fine. And she did. She turned out to be an amazing teacher because Kendra has as much love for children as what my wife does. If you've ever worked with my wife and have seen her work with young people, yeah, Sue said, I could teach with Kendra. This fall, Kendra is going to Wichita State to get a degree in elementary education. Is she ever going to go back to the Peace Academic Center and run that place? We told her she could. She probably could. You know, I don't know what Kendra's going to do with the rest of her life, but I do know this. Her love of children is exceeded only by her love of God. She had as much faith as anybody I'd ever met. She was totally committed to what God wanted her to do. She said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. You're going to be my Lord. I'm going to do what you want me to do. Amazing, you know, you're with Kendra, you know the church is going to be okay. Doesn't matter what Satan throws at it. With people like Kendra around, the church is going to be okay. One other group of people that made me realize the church is going to be okay. You might be familiar with this place, Linside Mennonite Church. You know, I often laughed at college students because they sometimes take 5 or 6 years to do a 4-year degree. I took 18 weeks to do a 3-month sabbatical. Do the math on that one sometime. But what was amazing to me is how this church didn't miss a beat when I was gone. What was amazing to me and what spoke loudly to me was how you as a church stepped up and did what God called you to do while I was gone, whether you thought you had that gift or not. I'm not talking about just people who got up here on Sunday morning and shared. There was a lot of people who did a lot of things because Sue and I were gone. And you did them very well. You know, I look around this morning and I don't think there's anybody who wasn't here before I left. But I'm amazed at the growth that happened in Linside Mennonite Church while I was gone. You know, when I left, I said, this is an opportunity for you to discover what gifts God has given you and to exercise them. And I think you all probably laughed at me. But that's what you did. And again, thank you very much for hearing God's call, for saying, yes, Jesus, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. I'm going to do what you have asked me to do. So the challenge for this morning, you can't have a sermon without having a challenge, right? The challenge is, how do we as a church continue the good thing that has happened over the past 4 months? This is something Sue and I have talked about often. And I know that some of you have talked about it too, because you've told me that it's something we need to figure out, something we need to talk about, something we need to discuss. You know, what can happen at Linside going forward so that those of you who have discovered you've got these gifts can continue to use these gifts? Yeah, and Sue and I talked about this, and we're like, well, we're not sure how we're going to do this. And then God said, don't worry about it, I got this. So in June, Sue and I have to go to a family reunion in Indiana. So if anybody wants to preach in June or do anything else, you know, there's an opportunity. In August, my daughter has rented a house on the beach for her 40th birthday and has demanded that we show up that weekend. In October, we got a wedding in Kansas City that we got to go to. So God says, I'm helping you out. It's up to you to do the rest. So yeah, we as a church will have discussions about what this church looks like going forward. How do we continue the good thing that has begun? And I'm not worried about what's going to happen with Linside Mennonite Church, because I know you are God-loving people who know that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God, and you're going to make him Lord of your life. Thanks again for this opportunity, for allowing Sue and I to take this time. And thanks again for not changing the keys on the locks so that I could get back in when I came back. No, it is great to be back. We're looking forward to where God leads us in the future. And yeah, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living Christ. Please pray with me. Oh God, you are a great and mighty God, a God who is capable of incredible things, a God who does amazing things in our lives. Thank you for leading us, for guiding us, for commanding us to take times of rest. And thank you for those who stepped up during this time and did your work that needed to be done. Be with us, O God, as we go forward. Continue to lead us. Continue to show us how we can be your church, how we can be a light in a dark world, how we can be nice to everyone. And this I pray in the name of Jesus, your Son.